International Securities Watchdog, International Organization of Securities Commissions, or just call it IOSCO, unveiled the first global approach to regulating crypto assets and digital markets, being concerned about last year's collapse of the FTX exchange, leading to consumer protection apprehension. The industry, which typically only has to comply with anti-money laundering checks, has been calling for a global approach to regulation as different jurisdictions follow their own rules. These calls prompted intervention from regulators worldwide who said rules were needed for crypto conglomerates that combine many activities under one roof with few safeguards for customer assets to stop conflicts of interest. The watchdog aims to finalize standards by year-end and expects its 130 members worldwide to use them to plug gaps in their rulebooks, so eliminating fragmented regulation and the ability of firms to play off regulators against each other. So joining me from London, UK, is Atose, who is the founder and CEO of KoinKoin. Thank you so much, Atose, for joining us once again.
Thank you for having me.
Now, we've had discussions over and over again where our financial experts and, of course, investors have talked about the need for regulation for the crypto world. So now that we're having new rules coming on board to regulate these activities, one question that begs for answer is, why did it take so long for this set of rules to come up? And of course, what are the implications as regards these rules in terms of what it sets to achieve?
Well, with regards to why it took so long, I think it's really just an understanding of the industry, what it represents, who it's for, what the, virtual asset services, who they serve. And there wasn't really much understanding in the earlier days. If you want to go maybe as recently as 2017, for example, it was largely a retail-focused market. And some people believe it's still largely a retail-focused market. So the understanding of what crypto assets represent to the wider market is only just coming to focus following the FTX saga. And as a result, IOSCO, as you mentioned, are looking to put forward a global standard, given that virtual asset services providers exist almost everywhere, all over the continent. One of the points they mention is a conflict of interest, where I think they're specifically citing things that happened with FTX, specifically things like trading and obviously management of client funds, and obviously the conflict of interest between doing both exercises. So their view is if virtual assets are deemed to be securities, then existing regulations for your traditional securities should really apply. And I think that's sort of the view that IOSCO has, and they're sort of trying to take the initiative to make sure that crypto asset providers, virtual asset services providers, or if you like digital asset services providers, come within that scope and are able to sort of manage and effectively protect client funds, and ensure the necessary, if you like, Chinese walls exist within the businesses that offer these services. So I think because now there's more understanding of the sort of volumes of flow you're seeing in our industry. Now there's more understanding of sort of the services we're able to provide, whether it's to the corporate world, some of the services we offer in that corporate OTC space. IOSCO is now cognizant of that, and they actually want to play a part in ensuring regulations exist.
Let's look at the issue of the protection of clients' funds. That's been a big issue for investors who actually lose funds when there's crypto volatility, or maybe when somebody engages in a fraudulent activity that affects the funds of the investors. We also have issues with money laundering and, of course, finance terrorism as regards crypto activities, as it were. So looking at this set of rules that you are privy to that is new and would eventually be ratified very soon, do you think they are adequate enough in dealing with those challenges that we have identified? And talking about implementation, how do you think that the regulators will be able to ensure that in terms of implementation, it is done with due diligence and it addresses these vices front on?
I really think it's good that you mentioned that point around counter-terrorist financing and anti-money laundering. A lot of us already have policies in place and due diligence is in place to ensure that any of the clients we onboard of following, that regime of AML and CTF. And of course, we expect that to continue. That is the norm, for most financial services. Again, I say that as someone who spent a very long time in financial services. The view, and I think the general understanding is a lot of people who provide these services in terms of digital asset services, a lot of them aren't necessarily financial services savvy. They don't really have much appreciation or understanding around, what the complications are around regulations and why you need to have them. So I think IOSCO is looking at this and saying, hey, we need to put an arm around this. We need to make sure it's managed properly. How do you manage it properly? If you think about it, from the perspective of how do we ensure that virtual asset services are actually, or companies who provide these services are actually in place, they put the necessary, controls in place. How do we actually do that? Well, there are a number of ways of doing it. Of course, IOSCO may have, ways by which they want to manage, things like, as I mentioned earlier, conflicts of interest, insider trading, and all these other, bits and pieces which affect or which cause these issues, that companies like FTX had. But the bottom line still is, there has to be a way to do it. And if you look at what some of the other regulators are doing, if you look at ESMA, it's the European regulator, they've introduced MiCA, which is the markets in crypto assets, markets or securities in crypto assets place. And the view there is to, provide or use sort of existing regulatory approaches as they apply to securities, in traditional finance and traditional banking, and sort of bring that over, things like the travel rule. Of course, the Financial Action Task Force has that in place already. So these are sort of things that exist already, which virtual asset services providers could be made to provide, right? So these are the things that will ensure, to answer your earlier question, that, crypto asset service providers are actually doing the necessary and following these regulations. So this is, again, because I've seen it work in traditional finance, I have an appreciation of how it's supposed to work. I'm very, very cognizant, and I'm certainly, from my perspective, I can actually see it working. I can see the regulations offering some sort of, benefit to service providers like ourselves to be able to provide, our services in a safer, environment. So.
All right, so we've seen issues where there's been crypto problems for these crypto service providers. Talk about blockchain, talk about different crypto platforms, as it were, that have gone through certain situations in terms of collapsing, having to fall at some time and rise, and investors not willing to plug their funds into their crypto platforms. And these are big challenges for these platforms. Now, with this set of rules coming on board, does it mean that these platforms have learned their lessons? Does it mean that the regulators have also learned their lessons from what has happened in the past in terms of volatility and the fragility of the crypto universe?
Well, I mean, it depends, right? So there are a variety of services which, for example, we provide in terms of the over-the-counter services we provide, using stable coins, across the African continent. That service isn't perhaps affected by the volatility of investment-grade coins like Bitcoin or Ethereum, for example, right? So the services, again, some of those services that we provide, remove us from that sort of world of crypto volatility, what's happening with Bitcoin today, what happened with it yesterday. So the view is the regulators, in my opinion, are having to take, a sort of bird-eye view and look at all types of services that are being provided and provide a regulatory umbrella for all of those services. With regards to the volatility, well, I mean, everything's volatile, right? Regardless of the type of security, right? It could even be, local currencies which are affected heavily by inflation, for example. It could, be equities, which are affected by moves and sways in the market. Could be bonds which are affected by, nations or sovereign nations and what's actually going on with them. For example, now if you look at what's going on in the United States with the debt ceiling, that's having some sort of impact on global markets. So, global markets will always be impacted by one thing or the other. So it's not necessarily to do with the volatility of crypto itself. It's more to do with, the risks which are inherent in trading any type of asset, whether it's obviously crypto is deemed as a security, as a security, or even if it's deemed as a currency, if you like, right? There are always risks associated with trading them, with the movement of value, and understanding who's actually doing the trading, and whether those who are doing the trading or exchange of value, if you like, whether they have an appreciation of what they're doing. So a lot of what we apply in the existing industries, a lot of what we've learned over decades of actually doing a variety, in traditional finance, a lot of what we've put in place in terms of regulations, in terms of controls in traditional finance, I think apply and should apply with crypto assets, regardless of the volatility. And of course, if you trade any product which is volatile, you can be expected to, you should certainly have some knowledge of what you're trading, and that should be part of the regulations, of course. And at the same time, you should sort of have, whoever's providing those services should have, a modicum of, responsibility to say, hey, if you're going to trade Bitcoin, you need to have some appreciation of this is what's going on in that space. Here is what you need to know. Bitcoin, for example, could be volatile. If you decide to trade, you may lose your funds. Please be aware of this, right? That's one side of what I think regulators would expect. On the flip side, there's need to ensure that, whatever companies are doing, there's a clear separation between, client funds and company funds, a clear separation of, proprietary trading, for example, of crypto assets by certain companies, and of course, what clients choose to do. And there's also a view of, who is the client? Are we talking about retail clients? The regulators that apply to them will differ considerably from regulations which will apply to institutional clients and what they're trying to do with crypto. So these are the sort of things that, I expect, the regulator to bring into focus. And I personally think it's very encouraging what IOSCO is doing. And I also think, again, in line with what ESMA introduced last month in April with MiCA, I think that's also very encouraging. And it's good to sort of see these regulatory bodies coming into place to assist, say, firms like ourselves, protection for ourselves, of course, but also protection for, our clients.
That it's very encouraging to see this sort of improvement in the crypto world. Now, we know that there are some countries who have been obstinate and have refused to accept and incorporate the crypto platforms or activities, as it were, into their financial system because, of course, based on the various things that you mentioned that has to do with volatility and the fact that people don't want to lose their investment. So now that we're seeing a kind of structure coming into place for the operation of these crypto platforms, do you see this as a sort of encouragement for government institutions, financial institutions across various continents now to see how they can accept crypto and, of course, include it into their financial system?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's encouraging. Again, like I say, with what the European-wide regulators doing, it's certainly encouraging. But we also see a lot of nations, in Europe, especially, who we feel are well ahead. Certainly, perhaps more progress has been made in Europe and Asia compared to North America. It's encouraging to see a lot of the nations sort of coming together, or even working on their own, and coming up with controls and regulations for crypto asset firms or firms who wish to provide digital assets or any form of service, whether that service is being provided to the retail place or to the institutional place where there's obviously expected to be more understanding. But that said, as I mentioned earlier, the view is we're now at a point where there's more maturity in the space. There's an understanding now that we haven't had, that I would say, the financial space didn't have pre-FTX, right? So as much as FTX in and of itself was a very unfortunate event, it's now, if you want to use the term, it's moved things forward a lot quicker in terms of, getting these global watchdogs and these regulators to sort of take an interest and provide what exists already in traditional finance in terms of regulations, control frameworks. And again, my view is it should be welcomed. There is obviously a view to perhaps use decentralized forms of control, to provide, if you wish, some sort of regulation for cryptocurrencies. But I think what we already know in terms of the traditional finance and how financial, securities or any sort of financial assets are managed, I think what we've already learned over the decades gone by in traditional finance should still apply. We should still look to what we already know, problems we've solved already. We should still look to bring those sort of controls and that sort of framework. We should still look to bring that with to the digital asset space. And I think that's what IOSCO is kind of looking at. They have a good view given, their member base, especially with the GEM, on the emerging market perspective, where a lot of emerging market countries are members of IOSCO. They're looking at that sort of cross-border view. How is that going to be managed? Would they perhaps look to introduce, a travel rule, if you like? Would they perhaps look to, manage sort of the cross-border, transfer of value that we see with digital assets? I mean, it's a great idea, right? And again, for protection of customers and then clients' funds, I think it's certainly something we should look at. It's something that should be welcome. And of course, as we evolve, as the industry evolves, if we get to a point whereby we're able to, use technology to provide a sort of decentralized, control, whereby it's, as you mentioned earlier, the sort of elements of fraud which we sometimes see in this industry, we could be protected against those sort of things. That's also something which I would say, we can look forward to having in the future. But for where we are now, where we stand right now, I think the focus should solely be placed on bringing together, the control frameworks that we understand in the financial assets space, applying it to cryptocurrencies, and taking it from there. I think there's a lot of value in doing that.
Thank you so much, Atose, for joining us. We are hoping that with the new set of rules coming on board, it will spring forth a new revolution in the crypto world where people will be safe in terms of their funds that invest into these different platforms. We appreciate your presence.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.